Welcome to another OCD recovery YouTube video. Today I want to talk about my journey with sensory motor because I think this topic can never be covered enough. I also want to talk about why it can also be referred to as, say, hyper-awareness or somatic OCD, why there's a lot of people out there that might have mild OCD but not chronically latched to where it was like it's basically hindered my life, 24/7. I was in the mental hospital. Tried to jump out of a moving car. I definitely thought there was no hope. I had 24/7 chronic anxiety. I basically was in a panic attack for 2 years straight. And I really didn't think I was ever going to come out the other side, which most people think. I have this great picture above me right now. I've had people be like, oh, can you do the video in front of that picture again? I'm doing the video in front of that picture again. So before I go any further, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, share it. It's really good for the algorithm. So what's interesting about sensory motor, it can also be called hyper-awareness. Now, when we think of sensory motor, we think of the typical stuff. The breathing, the swallowing, the salivation, the heartbeat, noticing the bridge of your nose. There's like really 5 or 6 common ones that most people who just Google, I can't stop thinking about my blinking. I can't stop thinking about my saliva. I can't stop thinking about my breathing. They'll come across sensory motor OCD, and the other most commonly used term is somatic OCD. The terms really don't mean anything. They just give you an idea to what your core fear is. It's like ROCD. We don't have to call it ROCD, but it gives you an insight into what your core fears are, which surrounding your relationship. Where Puro doesn't do that. Why we don't use the term Puro at all in OCD recovery is because when you watch people on YouTube and talks and forums and Instagram channels and TikToks and Reels, they talk about that Puro is something a little bit different than other types of fears, to where they think, oh, well, all my stuff is obsessions based. And that's not true at all. Your mental compulsions are the compulsive cycle. There's no such thing as having OCD without compulsions. All your compulsions are automatic mental rumination because you're scared. Also, sitting down on the couch and analyzing. Also, if I followed you around, you more than likely do have outward compulsive behaviors such as avoidance and stuff like that. So Puro doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't use it, and I don't think it's good for anyone. It doesn't give you insight into anything that's correct, and we should probably move away from using Puro completely. Where, like I said, sensory motor gives you an idea, or hyper-awareness, that you're afraid of this hyper-awareness of this sensation. So when I first became stuck with sensory motor OCD, I have a decaf coffee because it's like 4:45 at night, and I've learned my lesson from drinking coffee this late over many years of overly caffeinating in a compulsive manner. So when I first developed sensory motor OCD, I really had no idea what was going on. Basically, I became hyper-aware of my tinnitus. I became hyper-aware of my salivation and swallowing. I had blinking for a little bit, and I didn't think there was any way to get better. Just like everyone in the beginning of their OCD recovery journey, I thought it was different. The reason why I thought it was different, and why a lot of sensory motor people think they're different, particularly for the breathing, the swallowing, the salivation, the heartbeat, is because the gold standard ERP, exposure response prevention, which is obviously what it says on the tin, exposing yourself to your fears, allowing yourself to feel a certain way, and then going on with your day as best as you can, and letting the automatic rumination that comes on with that play out, which is usually actually not explained correctly in the OCD community. So, when you're facing a fear, a lot of people forget that. They're like, oh, well, just go about your day. And they go, well, what happens if I start ruminating? When you face something that you've been avoiding for a long time, whatever it may be, an avoidance behavior, an outward exposure, such as touching something like a handle if you have contamination OCD, you're more than likely going to get a major spike in symptoms, and that can come in the form of automatic rumination, thoughts, images, sensation, and urges, and you have to wear those as best as you can. So when I hear most 99% of people explain how to handle exposing yourself to your fears, they don't entirely cover the whole entire picture. It's understandable. It's really difficult to know what's going on when you're not an OCD chronic sufferer. I'm not trying to put anyone down, but it's very difficult to understand what it's like to suffer at the chronic level. And sometimes the people who have been there we tend to know it the best. I mean, it's just a reality, especially when you come out the other side, like I have with sensory motor. I think the sensory motor information is very poor. I think it's not well understood and explained to people that have sensory motor. And as someone who's come out the other side and suffered with it for 3 years and had other type of hyper awareness fears that were basically plaguing me 24 hours a day. And let me give you a background of what some of those are. That's hyper awareness of my clothing, hyper awareness of my body, just moving in general, hyper awareness of anything such as my anxiety symptoms, like very hyper aware of them, which I think anyone who has anxiety sort of will, but it could be anything. It could be hyper awareness of the snot in your nose, your bladder, groinal responses can also be considered a hyper awareness because you're hyper aware of the response itself and you're trying to rid yourself. So it's not just the basic sensory motor. This is any type of sensation that you're afraid of having. Now, the reason why exposures aren't necessary in the way that we think, well, let's go back the other way. Let's use it in a different sense. Let's say you have contamination OCD and you don't touch things. A very typical contamination. We're not even talking about the fear, the core fear. Let's say the core fear is what happens if you get contaminated and you touch a family member and that family member dies. That could be the core fear. So if you don't address that core fear, you could do all the exposures you want. You're not going to get as far as you think because you're still deathly afraid you're going to have one of your family members pass away at the hands of your contamination. Anyone who's watching this who's also suffered with contamination OCD will understand what I'm talking about. Now, you're going to breathe, salivate, swallow, blink. Your heart's going to breathe for the rest of your life. Now, people say to me, are you telling me I don't directly expose myself to those particular sensations? I'm saying that you don't. I'm saying there could be scenarios where it's possible. I never did it once. And I would say I've made more progress with sensory motor. I'm in the top 3 sensory motor cases, recovery cases on the planet. That's an irrefutable fact. That might sound cocky, but it's the truth. I talk to enough sensory motor people. I am around enough sensory motor people to know that there's not a lot of people that have recovered like I have. There's 3, maybe 5 that I can name, and I know all of them. I'm friends with all of them. And the reason why the 3 of us have made, and that includes Paul Little, me, and Rob. The reason why we've made so much progress is because we understand that exposures are not necessary for sensory motor OCD. The reason why exposures are not necessary for sensory motor OCD is because it's actually not what's keeping you stuck. The sensation is irrelevant. It's going to be there. It's not that I never notice my sensations ever again. And that's something a lot of sensory motor / hyper awareness people go into that recovery process with the belief that they never want to notice those sensations again. But that just isn't the case. The reason why we stay stuck with sensory motor OCD is because we have what's called the fear of fear, aka conditional life acceptance, that if we notice such sensations, our life is going to be ruined. This has the same applicability for tinnitus-based fears. So if you're suffering with tinnitus, whether it's the fear of developing tinnitus or you actually have tinnitus, like myself, been to a lot of music festivals, I still have my Ultra wristband on because I'm a nerd and my wife tells me to take it off. She's like, you're not 18 anymore. You're in your mid-30s, grow up. And I say no, so I'm not going to. But it's important to realize that a lot of these noise blocking devices and constantly needing a fan on, I sleep with a fan, by the way, but I don't do it for the purpose of drowning out the sound. I wasn't driving with my windows open. I was so hyper over concerned with making my ear damage worse. There's nothing wrong with wanting to protect your ears if you're shooting weapons or if you're going to music concerts and you're standing by big subwoofers. Sorry if that's bouncing. I have it on this glass table, so if you see it go earthquake mode, that's why. So I realized in the beginning of the video I can't touch the table. That is because you're afraid of being stuck for the rest of your life, which is what we call conditional life acceptance, aka fear of fear. Because fear of fear is the fear of being stuck forever, the fear of going backwards, the fear of developing a new theme. So, when I was speaking to people in the beginning of my sensory motor recovery journey, I realized very quickly that no one really understood it. I remember people telling me that I had to expose myself, or I remember I had someone tell me to spit into a cup for the rest of my life. And while I think that's funny, obviously I think it's hilarious now, I realized there was something more to it pretty quickly. I realized that it had nothing to do with the sensations. It had nothing to do with the blinking or the saliva or all the breathing. All that was not actually what was keeping me stuck. What was keeping me stuck was the belief it was going to ruin my life for the rest of my life. That was at the core of the fear, and it was super important to cover that because For a very, very long time, I thought that if I just exposed myself to my sensation for an extended period of time, I would recover. Now, I want to segue this into all types of acceptance. When I'm working with people, when I'm talking to people in webinars and coaching calls and the WhatsApp groups and the Facebook groups at OCD Recovery, a lot of people say these words, and I did this a lot, and I'm going to break it down a little bit. They'll say, I'm leaving it there. I am leaving it there. I'm leaving the anxiety symptoms there. I'm leaving my sensory motor there. I'm leaving my hyper awareness there. And I've worked with, like I said, I've worked with people who have had hyper awareness of their conscious, hyper awareness of their thinking patterns, and then one of their compulsions can be, well, they're trying to analyze the way they think to remember how they think because they're afraid that they can't remember how to think. Rewind that and listen to what I just said. People who are hyper aware of the digits in their fingers and their toes, hyper awareness of the bridge of their nose, hyper awareness of their eyelashes. Anything that you could be hyper aware of, that's a sensation or automatic bodily function, something you put on your body, again, all comes down to the fear of never noticing that again. Now, if it's fear of noticing a certain clothing and you're not wearing that clothing anymore, such as, say, underwear, I did this for 15 years, then yes, you have to expose yourself to wearing underwear. But the bodily sensations from sensory motor, the big five, right? Blinking, breathing, salivating, saliva, heartbeat, bridge of the nose, those big ones, the automatic bodily function. And the reason why I mentioned the bridge of the nose, because it is something I've seen a lot, is because you're scared if you notice that for the rest of your life, it's going to ruin your life. Those things are not going away unless you're no longer here, which means you're dead. So, but clothing hyper-awarenesses will need to have some sort of exposure hierarchy of that particular piece of clothing, where sensory motor is not like that. So what happens is, back to what I was saying about people saying they're leaving it there, when I listen to the tone in their voice and I see how it's coming across, what they actually are saying is this. Hey, I'm leaving it there, like, please go away, please go away. But that's not what we mean. What I mean is this: if you were to notice your, say, saliva and swallowing for the rest of your life, if you were to notice your breathing for the rest of your life, that it would be uncomfortable, but it's not the end of the world. When I listen to people talk about how they're wearing it, as I said before, they're not actually going about wearing it. They're going about leaving there with the hopes that's going to go away. And that's really one of the main things. So the principles of sensory motor recovery from the big automatic bodily sensations, like I said, breathing, blinking, swallowing, salivation, heartbeat, those ones, bladder functions, anything that's internal in your body, a physiologic function, you don't need direct exposures. Usually the reason why people are exposing themselves, and I did this, is if I expose myself to my breathing, I'll habituate, that keyword habituate, which is really a sticky word in the sensory motor, which I don't recommend using because it kind of insinuates it's going to go away and you're never going to notice it again. And that's not what's going to happen. If you're an athlete like myself, or you're hiking, or you're doing anything, you're going to notice your sensations. That's what happens when you're in a sympathetic response. And you can't breathe when you're hiking at 13,000 feet. That's part of the deal. So if you go into it with the idea that you're never going to notice these sensations again, and that equates to recovery, you're in for a rude awakening, because that's not what recovery means. Same principles apply to tinnitus, clothing, hyper-awareness of your consciousness, but some exposures can be necessary. And really the recovery process is breaking down the fear of being stuck for the rest of your life, why it wouldn't be the end of the world, why if you notice these sensations, your life isn't over, and stuff like that. Agreement doesn't mean acceptance, and then we go from there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's obviously a very important video to me. Comment down below if you want to talk about it. Obviously, I love talking about sensory motor. I speak at all the webinars. If you have if you want more information on the webinars, which I speak 30 minutes or 45 minutes at every single webinar, that includes, we have the acceptance webinar coming up. We have a health webinar coming up on the 16th of May. Email info@ocdrecovery.com. Again, that's info@ocdrecovery.com. They're very affordable. They're fun. They're interactive. We have people ask questions, and they're really, really good. And I like talking to people in the community. We get to talk to people all over the world. I'm very fortunate for that. It's a very unique experience. So yeah, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and you will hear from me again soon. Thank you, guys.